President Radcliffe, members of the board, and fellow members of the Farmers Union. I guess that most of you have heard about the antitrust case in California. The antitrust case in California, where a group of ranchers won a judgment of $32,700,000 from the great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. I'm here today to discuss that suit because in 1967 I was named liaison person between that suit and the South Dakota Farmers Union. I have something to report to you because that suit is the best lawsuit in the history of agriculture. It's the best because, for once, our side won, and it won pretty darn big. When anybody wins an antitrust judgment, the court multiplies it by 3. Somebody said maybe I might tell a joke, but winning $32 million is no joke, I'll tell you. Originally, the suit was filed against the country's 3 biggest food chains, Safeway stores, Kroger and Company, and A&P. The A&P case, or the Safeway and the Kroger case, was settled out of court, but A&P, they decided to fight it out. This mistake caused A&P a whole lot of trouble. They got a new president and a new chairman of the board, and they sold some of their stores, and they also that mistake got them this judgment of over $32 million. The suit was filed in 1968, and when it went to court in 1974, it took 6 weeks. It was a David and Goliath bout. There were not many on the wagon then, but since the settlement, numerous suits have been filed, and there are more to come because our side proved by admissible evidence that ranchers were being ripped off to the tune of 20 cents a pound during that period in question through a conspiracy of supermarket chains to fix prices on all the beef and the cattle that the ranchers sold. When the meat promoters of South Dakota went to Washington on the beef in, one of its spokesmen said if the ranchers are being ripped off, they wish to know about it. We proved that they were being ripped off before they ever went to Washington. The suit proved it. There's no guesswork. The court decision has now been printed officially and is being cited by other judgments. It has the power of law. It's established. So our attorney Aliato said that cattlemen no longer have to sit around and get their heads beat on. Here's the court decision right here. After much discussion, in the summer of 1927, the suit was filed because ranchers saw no alternative than to use the antitrust law passed in 1890, especially for cattlemen, then being ripped off by the packers, one of them doing the buying for all and that sort of thing. The ranchers decided to raise $25,000 to launch the suit. At that time, the cow-calf ranchers hadn't received cost of production for 8 years in a row. The investigation by the Federal Trade Commission, which is urged by the National Farmers Union, fizzled out soon after it was suggested when President Johnson pulled the teeth out of it by changing the F.T.C. probe into an investigation to learn about the changes that had taken place in agriculture from the farm to the dinner table. This took 18 months and nothing was done because it was diverted by the chain store influence. The grand diversion at that time was to tell the farmers and ranchers that their too low prices was caused by imported beef. This spring I did a 32-page analysis of this falderall using the reams of testimony given in 1964 to the Senate Finance Committee and the Tariff Commission. You can have a copy of this thing I did on imported beef by giving me your name and your address, and it proves that trying to boost cattle prices by reducing imports of hamburger beef is a diversion and a hoax, and it gives ranchers something to cry about, but nothing they can do anything about. I've also written a long mimeograph story about this lawsuit. Should be passed out now someplace. Maybe you have one. The nature of the cowman in general it tells, and what I think the future holds for us if we don't get on the stick and inform the public on the food problem. District 5 paid for the paper and for the ink. Take one home, read it, keep it, don't let anybody throw it away. You know, livestock is food. Don't pay any attention to mistakes in it. I didn't. Before I go any farther, I want to tell you about one of the witnesses who testified at the trial from South Dakota, George Levine, member of the state South Dakota Board and District 5 chairman. Well, George took a cow-calf cost-price schedule he and his neighbor worked out using the directions sent from Brookings on how to keep costs on a ranch done like any other business. This includes depreciation, interest, taxes, family labor, management, in fact, everything. Their schedule showed that for the year, ranchers fell short of making it, according to Brookings, by about $267 on a 400-pound calf, which they took the sale rate. So, the plaintiff's cattleman lawyer, Joe Aliato, put George on the stand with his cow-calf schedule. But the A&P lawyers objected because they said George was just a farmer and he wasn't an expert. So the judge took a copy to lunch with him, and when he returned, he told the court that he'd cut through that objection like a hot knife through butter. Now that's kind of funny talk for a federal judge, but it's true. It's an old fundamental law, he said, that a man is an expert in his own business. So who would be more of an expert than George Levine? So George gave his testimony, and the jury was given copies. The suit was filed in 1968, or after the suit was filed in 68, the price of cattle began to rise a little bit and kept on slowly, according to our lawyer. After the case was settled with Safeway and Kroger, prices came up, and for the first time, farmers said they had made a little money. Safeway and Kroger agreed to pay the plaintiffs $85,000 and sign consent decrees. Each and every practice the defendants had been engaged in that ripped off the ranchers was to be stopped. And if they continue, they're guilty of contempt and will suffer the consequences. For the first time, getcha, since 1952, the price went up to 47 cents a pound, national average. And applying that figure from the USDA figures, it meant that by reason of that consent judgment, an additional revenue of about $4 billion for American cattlemen. When we first launched the antitrust suit, we thought we might tie a class action to the case if we won, but the judge ruled this would be improper. This summer, A&P wanted to get out of the suit, and so agreed to settle a $32 million judgment for a payment to the plaintiffs of $9 million. So our lawyers settled. But they also got $1 million for the several groups, like the Independent Stock Growers of America and South Dakota, who had supported the suit in various ways since its inception. We are now in the process of dividing up this money in an equitable manner. If we can figure that out, it's the biggest amount of money any group or any corporation ever got when they didn't even have a case in court. But those who receive money will sign a paper not to sue A&P anymore, and we can and will begin other suits against other chains and other outfits, and we will be out among you asking for support and some money to begin the case, because it's your case too. Personally, I have, for years, been in favor of a permanent farm ranch stabilization program similar to the Brandon Plan, and not keep farm prices tied to the whims of the weather or to droughts in foreign countries or to unemployment figures, because we're talking about the food supply necessary for human life. This idea conflicts, I know, with the position taken by the big livestock men's organizations who seem to hate everything connected with the government and government action. They say, stand on your own 2 feet, brother. Well, I'm sure their ideas date back to the days of the big cow outfits, whose main problem, outside of wolves and hard winters, were getting more and more range. Stabilization means that certain troublesome neighbors would be able to keep on operating and not have to fold up. Now this, it seems to me, that the commandment, thou shalt not covet anything belonging to thy neighbor, such as his school lands, was not to be talked about or even considered. If we had stability now, these hogs wouldn't be 150% of parity, which is too high, and calves 40% of parity, which is too darn low. Ben Radcliffe suggested I might read a poem or so that I've written. So here is one I did some years ago, back in the time when we had that big killer blizzard that swept across the northwest corner of South Dakota and the southwest corner of North Dakota and eastern Montana, and left a great big crust of hard snow on the ground. This is in the form of a letter I sent to the senator. Dear Senator, the snow is deep and it's crusted rough, and it's 30 miles to Beer. The well pump's good when the motor runs, but the hay is plenty dear. The mercury hangs around 10 below, and it's been that way for days. Cattle simply stand around, for the snow's too deep to graze. What hay we have, we string out thin, because our stacks have dwindled. We try to keep them strong with cake, but they bawl like they've been swindled. Last fall, when we sat down with the bank, we were deeper in the red. We told the bank that the price went down. Then hawk your land, they said. With running costs and taxes high and calves and yearlings low, we signed more notes and mortgages before they'd let us go. So I asked the bank, how does it come? And why are prices so poor? Just sign right here on this dotted line. I don't know, I'm sure. So I wrote a note to our congressman, who replied, opinions vary, but it's canned corned beef from the Argentine. Yours truly, E.Y. Berry. I talked to our cattle leaders then. Could they pull some political strings with the guys they knew in Washington that help what livestock brings? In violent anger, they answered back, stockman's stalking tough. Just bow your back and raise more stock if you think the going's rough. We don't want help from the government. We're strong as a mountain ram. If you can't adjust, you should go bust. To hell with Uncle Sam. If you can't raise steers for even a dime, you're to have a sail and pack up your junk in your old pickup and head off down the trail. He'd like our spread if we'd sell and move, and he wouldn't care where we'd go. He'd get all the land adjoined his place if the bank would load him the dough. Well, we've used good bulls, and their stock is fine, and they've built up quite a name. We've fought the droughts and the bitter cold, but the price is a losing game. So, Senator, sir, we're nearly done, and soon we could go no more. I'd take a trip to see LBJ, but he'd kick me out of the door. Well, I got a little time left, so I'm going to tell you about some of the diversions and the rip-off. Now, one of the most pleasing diversions that there is in keeping the rancher's mind off his troubles is those little stickers that the parking men put on the back end of your end gate there on your pickup. So when you drive around in the pasture, the cattle can see them. They say, eat more beef, eat good American beef, or something like that. Well, there's a story about all this and how it works. There's a fine-looking steer calf saw that sticker, and he went to his mother and he said, "Mama, what does that mean?" Well, she said, "I don't know, son, but we'll go over and ask Papa. He's laying down over on the other side of the pasture. He's about had it. He's an old man." So they went over there, and they came to the bull, and they asked him, "What about those stickers?" And he put his glasses up above his eyes under his horns, and he says, "Well, I'll tell you, son." He says, "As far as your mother's concerned, she's a young cow. She don't have to think about this for a long time, maybe never. But he said, you're young, you're sleek, you're good looking, you're healthy, and in about 18 months you'll know what it's all about." And he said, just the key words to remember when you hear somebody saying, "good eating." But he said, as far as your father's concerned, as far as I'm concerned, he said, it's baloney. Well, two or three concerns, two or three outfits that have the power to buy 3/4 of any perishable product can control the price of the product. Now that's where the power of the chain stores are, power of the rip-off. Just two of them can get together and say, this is a maximum, what we're the ceiling price, what we're going to pay. Then the packers have to meet that. The feeders have to meet the packers, and the fellow on the range has to meet with the cow and calf has to meet that. Now the measure of this rip-off of the food chains can be seen. I have a custom chart, two of them within these folders that were handed out. One of them, they tell the story pretty good, which is the spread between the wholesale carcass beef and the retail sales value. Now, publisher out there in Colorado, old Gene Survey, publisher of the Rocky Mountain Journal, he got a meat team together there in 1968, and he sent them out in the Denver area to look at the meat counters, and with this Safeway cutout chart that showed the percentage of every cut in a carcass, they could find out how much they made with this percentage chart, looking at the prices of wholesale carcass beef. And this is for a 600-pound carcass of U.S. choice beef. Well, they came up with the answer of $188 gross per carcass. And these carcasses move through the store every 2 days. So after putting Survey's figures through a computer, a fellow here a few summers ago, he wrote me a letter and he said, you made a mistake, somebody did, in the decimal point, and so the figures of the markup was $237.80 per 600-pound carcass, or 104%. Well, old Gene Survey was in on this lawsuit. He's now dead, so he can't enjoy the victory over the change. But he offered anybody $5,000 to prove that this wasn't so, and he didn't get any takers. Milk and meat and bakery goods are perishable, and they turn daily, or every 2 or 3 days. Beef turns over every 2 days in the national average. The markup on milk and bread is 20%, so you can figure out the profit on how much they'd make on $1 worth of milk if they sold $1 worth of milk every day. And I figured it out here a while ago, and it wasn't very hard. It's $73. Now, if I invest $1 in the bank, I get 6.5% at the end of the year. But if I'm selling milk and there's no labor involved in handling milk, the man that brings it shoves it around and puts the old milk in front and the new milk in back, and the same with the bread, and that's what they make on milk and bread. Now these items, there's food, they carry the load in the store for all the many things that are not very fast when it comes to moving, like bobby pins and 7 kinds of pancake turners and Elmer's glue and Playboy magazine and paperbacks and another item which is everywhere and sold at bargain prices, and that's Pantyhose. I remember when ballpoints, pens were selling at $12 a pen, and these silk nylon hoses being fought over on the streets, women trying to get in. This is after World War II. Well, those pantyhose are pretty good things. Anybody can wear them, big, little, you know, fat or slim, fit anybody. They're on sale every place. You know, having a sale here and a sale there, any kind of a store. Now, I don't tell this story very often, but I'll have to tell it now. But I saw a sign having a sale on pantyhose. Well, my legs get cold, you know. They never get warmed up until along in June. So I thought I'd go and get a pair, and for myself. So I asked the woman at the counter if there's any place I could try them on. She pointed to a little place in the corner, and I went back there. It didn't take me long. I come walking out, and she looked at me, you know, and kind of like this. She said, "Man, you ain't supposed to put them on over your overshoes." Well, I'd like to tell you a lot of things. I've heard a lot of good, cheerful talk here today. Makes everybody happy. And I'd like to say the same thing. We look into the onward and upward into the future of big prices and big fat steers and all that sort of stuff, but I'm not going to tell you that because I don't think this is the truth. Because I think we're in a real depression. And we used to say back in the days after the other depression, the next one would make the next depression would make it look like a Sunday school picnic, the old one compared with the new one we're going to have. Well, now things are getting pretty darn queer and pretty darn goofy in the country, and these are the signs that go along with economic instability. And I just made a few notes about some of the goofy things. Let me see, weird things. Well, to mention a few, we begin with the Republican Party paying some professional second-story men to break in the Democrats. You all know about that. That ruined the political career of several people, and they had time to rest, and one of them went and joined the church to get out of it. Well, now we see the CIA making plans to poison people. That's pretty easy death, you know. We learn that they even tapped President Nixon's telephone. How about that? Well, we all know about old William Randolph Hearst of homestake fame. Well, his granddaughter, Patsy, turned into a bank robber. How about that? That ain't goofy. Well, we see the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, just dropped out of sight. Well, who pardoned Jimmy Hoffa anyway? And then, then we see Jimmy Hoffa's old buddy, Mr. Fitzsimmons, out playing golf with Nixon the other day on TV. So how do you figure that out? Now, the next thing that I think is pretty goofy is a FBI informant who took a shot at the president. Now, we all know about George Meany, the labor boss, but you know, I read a book this summer written by an old CIA guy by the name of Philip Agee, or Agee, lives in London now. I guess he's scared to come over here, but he listed George Meany as being in the pay of the CIA. So did Ford call up Meany to tell him to get on the ball so he could take some heat on this wheat business, or what about that anyway? Now we see New York City is about to go busted, and if these bonds, you know, the bonds they hold, they default on them, why, they've got to get some government help to make this good. They got to go to Washington. Now, what's the stockmen going to say about those fellows who run New York? Don't stand on their own 2 feet. And they said if they can't get the money in Washington, they got to send troops because there'll be riots, and some of those brokers will be out there rioting among the poor too. Now, just one other thing before I quit here. You know, And the other depression broke there in 1929, wasn't it, Emil? The old depression. Hoover said, he said before that, he said, we're going to have 2 cars in every garage and 2 chickens in every pot. Then we had the stock market break. And those guys that went busted, they had a way out. And that don't exist today. They could jump out the window on the floor, on the cement, and their problems were all solved. Now they can't do that anymore because those windows are all tight and their air conditioning in there, they can't open them. So they got to go to Washington in order to get some money or else get those troops. Thank you very much, folks, for listening.
President Ben, Vice President Adam, Secretary Lee, President Stan Moore of North Dakota, directors, delegates, members, and friends. Well, I'm delighted to be here, but Ben, I'm reminded of that old story that everybody has heard hundreds of times about the speechwriter who took care of the senator because the senator never gave him 1 ounce of credit. The speechwriter put out tremendous speeches, and when he asked for a raise, the senator said, "Why, sure, you write good speeches, but I give them. That's the important part." And then as he was going through the speech, page after page, you know, he was setting up all the problems. It reminded me of Ben's laundry list there, all the problems that faced that audience. And then at the bottom of about the 10th page, he said, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you the solution, the answer." And he turned the page, and the speechwriter had put, "Okay, you SOB, you're on your own." Now, I know Ben wouldn't do that to me because, after all, he referred to some of the solutions as he went along in his laundry list. You know, one of the events that I look forward to each year, Ben, is when on this evening that you and I appear, and we've appeared several times, you recognize and honor and award those people that do a superior job on building membership. And my heart was with you on the stage here this evening when you were passing out the awards. But Chuck Groth believes in working me when I come here. This afternoon I'd been invited to a little reception, and just as I was ready to go to this reception, the telephone rang, and Chuck said, "They're waiting for you over at the Plainsman. You'll have to get over there." So I did. I missed the reception, but it was important that I be over there. And then this evening, before Cliff could crown the Queens, Chuck reminded me that there was a 7:15 news conference here. So I get a good workout. But I was sorry to miss the recognition on membership. And I want here and now to commend and congratulate all of you, because that's what, in the final essence, really makes it go. To get people into the Farmers Union, and then you can do all of the other things that are so necessary, all of the other things that delegates say they want done. Ben, I never want to miss an opportunity to commend you for all of the backstopping through the year that you give the National Farmers Union. I want to tell you that we appreciate it on the national front, and I personally appreciate it, because Ben is one of those persons that I can call on a day's notice and ask him to pinch hit for me, and he always finds time to do it. Reminds me, many years ago, I was complaining to an old professor who had asked me to do something for him, and I said, "I'm busy." I said, "I'm involved in athletics, I'm involved in the debating team, all of these are extra, I'm carrying extra subject matter, and yet you keep asking me to do more." And he looked at me and grinned, and he said, "I never ask anybody to do anything for me that has time," because he won't do it. He said, "I only ask people who are busy." So Ben, I guess that's one way of saying to your constituency here that you are indeed a busy man, because you always find time to do what is necessary. Let me spend a few minutes now on this great year that we're now well into. We're now some 4 months into what could be the greatest year for this nation. And if it is a great year for this nation, it could be a great year for the world. Last July 1, we began our observance of our bicentennial, our 200th year as a great democracy, one of the great experiments of all time. And next July 4th will mark that birthday. And I'm hoping in these weeks and months that the American people will take time to think, to appraise, to examine, to ask ourselves, where are we going as a nation? Because I think it's incumbent on leaders to lead. And we are the leading nation in the world. And unless we can find answers in this country to some of the things that Ben outlined here in his little list, unless we can begin to find answers in this country, how can we expect the world to go anywhere? Because they're looking to us for leadership. And on many issues, I'm sorry to say to you that this country is dragging its feet. Now, I'm going to end up in a few minutes on that area, but in the meantime, let me say what I think some of the solutions. Ben, I wouldn't begin to try to find solutions to all the problems, but let me deal with some of them. Now, for the rest of our lives, every man and woman and our young people in this room, for the rest of our lives, we're going to be concerned, we're going to be involved in two key issues in this nation and in the world. And those two issues are energy policy and food policy. Now, we've been so inundated with energy policy in recent months that all of the people in this country seem obsessed with energy policy from the president on down. That's what you hear in Washington. That's what the president is talking about, is energy policy. Now let me make it clear that we have to have energy policy in this country. I know that and you know it. And the sooner we get a sane and sensible energy policy, the sooner this nation can begin to help lead the world, and the sooner a lot of the problems that we have around the world can be solved. Now, my big plea is that there just is not the same kind of concern about food policy as there is energy policy. And I submit that unless we can do both, if we get to the place where one of these policies has to succeed at the expense of the other, then it'll be a tragedy for this country. The challenge to this country is to move forward on both fronts at the same pace and with full recognition that one is as important as the other. You know, if you really got down to brass tacks, you'd find, and I say this to religious groups and consumer groups and at colleges, when you really get, I don't know, could that be thunder?
I hope so.
Well, if you folks need rain as bad here as we need it in Kansas and in Colorado, why, we ought to be clapping and helping the clouds. In fact, we have three very unprecedented and large forest fires in Denver. In Colorado. Probably be the greatest loss of timber that state has seen. And believe me, when I left the ground this morning, I looked to the west and hoped that the clouds that I saw would mean rain and snow tonight. Well, you see, if you really got down to brass tacks in terms of which one was the most important, I think food would come out. And I'd say this to church groups and the religious groups. I said, you know, you guys are overly concerned about energy, and I don't blame you, but remember where your real importance lies. Well, let me talk a moment then about food. Now, as all of you know, because everybody understands this, there's a food shortage in the world. But less understood is the fact that we have a dangerous food shortage right here in the United States right now. We, as Ben just indicated when he talked about that sale, we have extremely small supplies of pork in this country and an absolute shortage of milk. Our beef cattle herd is in the process of slow liquidation. We may be on the brink of a nutritional disaster. I said yesterday, and it shocked some people, and again this morning when I was visiting with some press people in Denver and this afternoon, that if we were to have a sudden return to economic prosperity in this country, if we were to have high employment, I want to tell you that we would be plunged right over to the edge in shortages. Now let me just talk about milk. And when I'm talking about milk, because I got some good statistics, I want you to think in terms of our livestock industry here in South Dakota, in terms of what's been happening to these various commodities. Remember, it happened in broilers, and now it's happened in the dairy industry, and unless we reverse policy, it could just go from one commodity to another. Now, our nation has been getting rid of surplus dairy farmers for 40 years, and for a while, the decline in the number of dairy farmers and milk cows was offset by a combination of other factors. Milk production per cow went up. It more than doubled since World War II. The remaining dairy farms got bigger, with more cows per farm. Total milk production actually increased until 10 years ago, and then it started down. Total milk production this year, 1975, is 10% less than 10 years ago. Now, in that 10-year period, we stretched the supply available for commercial consumption by doing several things. We were starting to have a shortage 10 years ago, but you see, we started cutting out the use of milk for feeding livestock, for feeding poultry. In other words, we didn't feed milk to pigs and to calves. We cut down on it. And we started cutting down on the donations for relief, you know, the powdered milk through the Food for Peace program. But now the crunch is here. There's no more milk that can be taken away from calves and pigs and needy people. And look what's happened to non-fat dry milk. That's the end product of surplus milk. The price has gone up from 14.5 cents a pound in 1961 to more than 70 cents a pound today, a quintupling of the market value. Yet the 40-year downward trend in dairy farmers and cows goes on. The biggest milk-producing state, Wisconsin, they've had 1,500 dairy farmers quit so far this year. Last year, your neighboring state of Minnesota lost 3,300 dairy farmers. Now, the tragic irony of this situation is that all that's saving the American consumer at this very moment is high unemployment, because we've got 13%, not 9 as the government tells you, or somewhere between 8 and 9%, but we have an effective 13% of unemployment in this country. And if employment were high, let me tell you, a lot of dairy farmers would quit. They're trapped. They can't get enough out of marketing their cows, and if they marketed their cows, they haven't got a job to go to. And if employment goes up, some more of the dairy plant is going to go down. And so, and if we had high employment and greater prosperity, the consumers would be buying even more milk, and it just isn't available. So, I've just given you a bird's eye view of one commodity, milk, which is a forerunner of what can happen in other commodities as well when you allow the plant to go down. Now, as Ben indicated, we've had more problems than Carter has pills. The worst of them was the embargo on sales to Russia. As Ben says, it cost millions and millions of dollars. There's a low estimate of 25 cents per bushel up to 75 cents per bushel that farmers will never get back as a result of the embargo that came on last August 14th. As Ben indicated, it was followed by a boycott. Now, so far, no wheat has not moved because the unions did respond to court injunctions and kept loading grain. But the impact of the boycott and the embargo has been tremendous, and there's no assurance that we're not going to be nickeled and dimed to death once this new pact is settled and the embargo is lifted. It was lifted on Poland last Friday, but the Russian embargo is still on. And what will keep the Russians from moving back in and out of our market as price dictates? So that's why the embargo was devastating, uncalled for. I don't think it was a legal matter, if you want to get down to that, whether they could legally sustain it, but the point was that they have. Now, in recent days, some 12 days ago, this government at the International Wheat Council in London put forth a reserve program. They talked about setting aside 1,100,000,000 bushels. It's 60 tons of grain, but about a little over 1 billion bushels of grain, wheat and corn. The thing that's wrong with it is that it would be the same old score. It could be used to bust farmers' prices, and I've objected to it. In the strongest terms I know how. I wrote to Bill Kufis of the Farm Bureau, John Scott of the Grange, and Orrin Lee Staley of the NFO, and asked them to join the Farmers Union in opposing this reserve program because it will break farm prices when they move onto the market without any kind of a game plan, without any kind of a loan program that's meaningful to farmers. And it will be a cloud that hangs over the international market because it'll be there, and unless there are safeguards in terms of how it can come out, in terms of what kind of a price it can come out of that reserve as well as a domestic reserve, it means nothing for the American farmer. And I was pleased to note that the Canadians and the Australians were at that conference and that they objected just the same as Farmers Union objects, and they called attention that the answer to it was international commodity agreements, which is what the Farmers Union has been saying. International commodity agreements with minimum and maximum pricing provisions. And next Monday morning I'll be in Chicago to testify before the Joint Economics Committee. They're having a field hearing, and on the following day, Tuesday, I've been invited by Vice President Rockefeller to be back in Denver to talk about what's happening here to our domestic economy, and I intend to tell him as much as I can possibly tell in 5 lousy minutes, because I've been told at least 10 times by everybody that's involved that we'll have only 5 minutes. I think it would take 5 hours to tell this administration how to deal with the laundry list that Ben was talking about a little bit earlier. You see, I want to make Dechant work for farmers. This is what I'd like to say to Vice President Rockefeller and to Secretary Kissinger, because what we ought to be doing now, we ought to be saying, let's go back under the auspices of the United Nations. Let me just back up a second. You see, right now, the only negotiations that are going on in the world are in Geneva under the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. That's known as the GATT. there we're negotiating. And that's fine. I'm for negotiating. I'm for talking about international trade. But the thing that's wrong with it is that Russia and China aren't there because they're not signatories to GATT. So Farmers Union, we've been calling for moving under the auspices of the United Nations to the International Wheat Council to have the grains group get together and see if we can't put together a commodity agreement with pricing provisions, and I'd make sure that Russia and China were there. Because the only time you bargain, the only time you got bargaining power is when you've got something that somebody else needs and wants. And right now, Russia needs some additional grain. And I would say that one of the prices, in addition to a good price, one of the prices, in addition to a good price, would be that Russia would have to join the international grains arrangement to come in as a full partner and set, obey, and observe the minimums and the maximums. Because remember, Russia is the largest grain producer, largest wheat producer on earth. And if they have a good crop next year, we'll be competing with one another for ideological purposes on whose bus, whose market. And that's why you have to have international agreements and have to have everybody in the ball game. And right now, I'd drive that bargain with Russia. You only got one time to drive that bargain, and that's when you got some chips on your side of the table, and I'd play them. And let me say to you, I think Russia would join, because Russia has in years past been a member of the international wheat agreements. It's not a member now, so it wouldn't be a new, strange idea to them. I think they just need a little urging, a little pushing to get into the ball game. I'd like that better than I would the bilateral agreement that we're going to announce in a few days. And let me say, I'm not against that. I think that any kind of an agreement, even a bilateral agreement with United States and Russia on grain for 5 years, is a lot better than what we got now. But what we really need is a multilateral agreement where you get everybody into the act so that you can have something to say about prices and cut out this undercutting that goes along internationally. Well, Ben, bear with me a second here. I think it's time that we tried for some new approaches. They're really not new, but they're new to this country because we really haven't gotten into the ball game. You know, we live in an interdependent world, and we like to talk about that. Gee, every speaker in Washington, you know, talks about how small the world is and how we're dependent on each other. But we really haven't got down to brass tacks on doing something work. So I spelled out 3 things that are absolutely necessary if you're going to bring about any kind of a food policy in this country that can have and lead to some impact on the world policy. And that is that if farmers of this country are asked to go all out and produce, that we've got to have access to world markets. Now, there can be absolutely no argument on that, because our agriculture is divided in such a way that our country here, our land resources, what we can use land, is divided in such a way that in some states, all or most of their agriculture production moves into the world market. And so you have to have the kind of a combination in this country that moves all farmers into a better position and moves away from the thought, you know, that one group of farmers can somehow prosper at the expense of other farmers. I was in Wisconsin, Ben, a year or so ago, and I caught unshirted hell because they thought grain prices were too high. And I said I didn't think grain prices were too high, it was just that dairy prices were too low. And that was the same thing in terms of hogs, it was the same thing in terms of livestock. The challenge was a better farm price for all commodities. The second item, The second one is a very important, because this is one that really separates, and this is the one I've been hitting hard with religious groups. Incidentally, within the last 10 months, I've appeared now before some 8 religious groups and large conferences. And I'm so pleased and surprised that all of a sudden they're interested. You know, they really want to do something and don't know what. They don't understand the situation. But once we spell it out from our responsibility here at home and in the world, why, they begin all of a sudden to see it. This is why, and consumer groups are the same way. Ben, I think you've got Bill Walker on the program tomorrow. I asked Leonard Woodcock last March to join me in setting up an alliance for food, employment, and resource policy in this country, and he readily agreed. And we've been meeting with religious groups and consumers, and I'm amazed at how friendly these people are to us once they understand our side of the story. Now, in that process, of course, we learned their side of the story too. But when they understand how important food is in this country and how they've been shortchanged on understanding the problem, why, we find great friends hurriedly. Now, the second point is that there's no way for the hungry people of this nation or the world to be fed in the long run if farm producers here and elsewhere cannot survive economically. Now, if you can't make that, if you can't understand that, school's out. You have to have a prosperous, healthy agriculture in this country and in Canada and in Australia if you're going to have grain available to feed the hungry in the world. Because these 3 countries, let's start how we do it. We market 50% of all the grain in the whole world. And Canada moves us up to 65, and Australia moves us up to 75. 3 countries market 75% of all the grain in the whole world, marketed by the same bunch of pirates. There's just 5 or 6 of them that market for all 3 countries. And somewhere along the line, we got to deal with that situation. We can't go on assembling the grain and turning it over to these multinational corporations that owe allegiance to no one nation on earth to do what they do. They'll be the ones that buy our grain cheap and sell it to the Russians a little bit higher in the months ahead. That's why we need to take a hard look at how we're going to market grain in this country. That's why I'm so pleased that our cooperatives are making the strides and beginning to move into the export picture. Because how do you have a yardstick? How do you have a measure device until you get into the ball game all the way? And that's why we're on the right track on that front. The third point that I hope to stress next Monday and next Tuesday is that there is no way for farmers of the developing countries, those poor countries, those underdeveloped countries, to get a foothold in world markets unless we develop an orderly system of world trade. You see, the rich countries squeeze out the things that the poor countries can make because we got the highest tariff barriers against them. That's why we haven't got the kind of freer trade that we need and that farmers must have if there's to be a prosperous agriculture. Well, let me close then. I hope and pray that this year now, this bicentennial year, that we're going to take advantage of it, and that we're going to find out ways and means to make our democracy work. And it's not working now. It's not working now because we have agreed over these last several decades that someone else ought to do it for us. And we're not tough enough, or we're not energetic enough to do the kind of participating that you have to do to make democracy work. This is a hard form of government. It's a very difficult form of government to operate. It's easy to live in some fascist country or some country, where the top few or the top man make the decisions and it's passed down and that's it. But it's a very difficult form of government when you have to inform yourself and participate in the processes to make it work. And that we haven't not been doing. We've just moved out. And I'm appalled. I'm shocked when I go to the cities and meet with groups and find out how little they know or how little they care about what happens at their state capitol or in Washington, D.C. So I say to you, this year somehow we've got to take our government back. We've got to take it back in every community, in every county, in every state, and we've got to take it back nationally. Next year is going to be a big, big year in America. I was visiting with Homer Ayres an hour or so ago, and we were talking about what a ride the American people are going to get in next year on the ideological front. I'm surprised at how fast the Reagan-type people and the Wallace-type people are already moving. And all you have to do is look at how well they did when they had a chance to run, or still have a chance to run in their respective states, to take a look at what might lie ahead for America. That's why I say we have to make it work by participating. And when you had these membership builders on the platform, that's meaningful to me, because it's in an organization like the Farmers Union where I think we can speak out for the good things, the right things. And I'd like to close by reading the last two paragraphs of the keynote speech that was given to you this morning by our colleague and associate from North Dakota. He said, "Farmers may be a minority, but it is this very minority that through its vision of a better tomorrow can lead the nation to new horizons for an improved human society." You see, it doesn't take the biggest organization in the United States, but there has to be a conscience somewhere. There has to be a group of people that are willing to lay it on the line and speak out at every level of government. And then Stan concluded by saying, this is the role of a farm organization in the 1970s. And that is the role that Farmers Union believes to be its obligation and mandate as a new farm organization for this generation. Now that's a challenge to us. I think we can do it. But that means, again, all of us working together, but there has to be somebody that speaks out, not just to farmers. Because remember, if we did that job well, there's 5% of us and there's 95% to deal with. That's why Farmers Union strikes out first to represent farmers price-wise, to represent farmers in all of the things as a part of an integral society, and then we move to have common ground with consumers, with labor, with religious people, with educators. If we can tell our story, we can have a great day tomorrow, and that will be great for America, because it'll move us to that second big thing. There's energy policy on one side, and if we can do all the things we have to do on the other side, we'll have food policy. That's what we lack in this country, national food policy. If we can put it together, we might have some peace in the world. Thank you.
I might tell you that I drove out, I spoke in Traverse County, Minnesota last night and decided to drive on out the rest of the way. And I brought my wife with to help keep me awake because I've been in the sick bed for about a week. And she slept all the way, and she's here and well rested, and I hope you have the opportunity to meet her. Her name is Karen. I'm awfully tired, but I'm very happy to be here. And as I travel almost on a monthly basis from ocean to ocean of this country, I find a very depressing thing happening in the American society. I find that our people are losing faith in our government, and we have to deal with that problem and not cover it up if we're going to effectively get into the whole area of planning. You know, what's happened in the last couple of months makes Watergate look like a Cinderella story. We find the CIA is wiretapping illegally in the form of a constitutional government without court order. We find enough poison hidden in the basement of Washington office buildings to destroy a town 10 times the size of the one we're now in. And we find that the FBI is illegally breaking and entering, and our people are depressed. And we find ourselves with a president that was not elected by the people. They say Ford's supposed to have a better idea. Well, I know a Ford that doesn't have any idea. He doesn't have any idea what it is to be unemployed. He doesn't have any idea what it is to put yourself out on the line on the farm and to be left with a bumper crop and no agricultural policy. He doesn't have any idea. And we're finding in the American society that things don't always go better with Coke, and we don't always meet the best and finest people on a Honda. We're finding that the advertising slogans may not be true and may be challenged. And as I travel, I am not a prophet of doom, but I say let us recognize the problem and deal with it before it consumes us. I get angry when I travel in a land that has all too much, and some, far too many, do not have enough. And I get angry when the old and the helpless are placed on fixed and final incomes, and their food cost, and their clothing cost, and their medical cost keep rising and daily deflate the standard of living that they would want to enjoy as the final years. And I get angry when those with high wages appear before congressional committees making $50,000, $100,000 a year and fight the minimum wage, when that wage is altogether too minimum. And I get angry when large corporations control wages and consumers and farmers. And I get angry when doctors control medicine and lawyers control law and the grain robbers control agricultural policy. And I get angry when I see that all the oil slicks are not on the water. But anger is not enough. Speeches are not enough. What we need at this time is dedicated, direct, purposeful, planned out action. And that's what the Farmers Union is all about. And that's what the Alliance for Food is all about. We need action directed at our decision makers. And we have to say for once and for all, no more bullshit. It's over. There's no easy way out of where we are. And if someone gets elected to office and they don't produce, then they shouldn't be in office. We need, as an organization, to be among that small group that's willing to say we will be counted and we will count. And we need directed action toward the free market, where, according to Earl Butz, we dwell. And the farmer is free to go broke, and the consumer is free to get raked off. And we need directed action dealing with the haves and the have-nots of this country. Are we a nation only bent for those who have? The real issue of this day is going to be, are we going to reward investment, or are we going to reward work? Every time in this country's history, that we have decided that we were going to reward investment, we have fallen to our knees and staggered. And every time we decide that we are going to reward work, we are healthy and things are good again. We need directed action toward what I call capitalistic socialism. Corporate socialism. We hear a lot of talk about socialism. Well, we live under a socialist system, but we live under a socialist system in which the corporations have injected themselves between the people and the elected power. We live under a system where fewer and fewer corporations say, we will take care of you. Listen to us. We will provide proper and adequate wages. And if you don't believe that, stop and review with me. Is it an accident that every time you plant a certain commodity, the wages are high on it, the return is high on it, and every time you harvest that commodity, almost every time, the price is down? Is that an accident? Is that part of nature? Is it one of the rhythms of the season? Or does it happen by corporate manipulation of prices? Is it an accident that Earl Butz put an embargo on the shipment of grain to Russia? When did he do it? The news leaked out that there was going to be a shipment of grain to Russia and prices started to rise. And Earl Butz put an embargo on that commodity, and I'm here to tell you that I bet that his embargo will not come off until you've had to sell what you have to sell. And then the embargo will come off, and you won't own it anymore. Is that an accident? If there is to be socialism, let it be without the profit motive. They have injected themselves between the decision makers and the people. They have the ability to manipulate and control decisions. They buy and sell presidents and presidential candidates. They buy and sell foreign governments and foreign purchasers. They buy and sell candidates that run for elected office. Is it an accident? I'll give you some homework to do. Buy some sugar-frosted cornflakes. Buy some sugar-frosted wheat puffs and figure out what it costs per ton. And figure out what it costs per ton to buy what's in it. Garbage on the American market. We need action, directed, convincing action. And that is, in my impression, what the Farmers Union is all about. And that is what the Alliance for Food is all about. We're not going to get any place just planning for food, because we have an energy problem then. We have an employment problem then. The time has come. We have never had to plan in this country for anything but war. The westward movement started and we had our feet in the mud in the East Coast, and we just came this way. And the Dust Bowl of the 1930s was a result of our lack of planning. Railroads that don't go anyplace anymore is a result of the lack of planning. Railroad after railroad grows back to grass. We have not had to plan because we have not had to worry about not having enough. But food, let us realize, is one of the basic essentials. And I announce nothing in saying that. And food is one of the areas that we may exert some leadership. We need a national food policy that takes into consideration the fact that farmers and consumers are not at odds, that farmers and laboring people are not at odds, but they are people who want to be rewarded for work, and that they have all too much in common, and that if they come and reason together, they can work out a national food policy that will be a benefit to both. As farmers, we're afraid of a national food reserve, and as consumers, we need one, and we have none. But we want a national food reserve that is not mandated by rules and regulations at the whim of the Department of Agriculture. But we want a national food reserve that is designed by statute so that it will not be dumped on the market to deflate against us once again. The consumer needs that national reserve, but it must be a three-level reserve. We must have a national food reserve for the nation, a national food reserve for our foreign customers, steady customers, and a national food reserve that contributes so that our word can be made good again to abate world hunger. And if Earl Butz would realize that, we wouldn't have to worry about farm prices for the next decade. And we need a system that promises the farmer a basic floor of price. And for that we settle in return for a basic ceiling on price, so that we can freeze the radical fluctuation that we now experience and take the speculator out of the marketplace. We need to realize food is a right, not a privilege. The food stamp program is presently undergoing all kinds of criticism, and in some areas, well, it should. But I might tell you that that program was designed to replace the old commodity system so that it wouldn't be so dehumanizing. It was designed so that people wouldn't have to beg. It was put in the Department of Agriculture so that it would not be a welfare program. And Earl Butz treats it like a welfare program, and he doesn't like it, and he ignores it. And 17 million people in this country are on food stamps. And you know what the alarming thing is? 23 million people qualify yet above that number. And we need a national nutrition policy. We need a national nutrition policy in this country that recognizes that malnutrition costs us money. Malnutrition cost $40 billion last year in the United States of America in bad teeth, bad eyes, bad health, work loss. And you want to know something else? Malnutrition cost only $30 billion when the recession started. And bad times mean bad times for anyone and everyone. They would have us stand at odds. They would have the farmer saying that the laboring man is the problem, that's why things are out of whack. The tractors cost too much, and it's the laboring man's fault. Do you ever stop and realize how much labor it takes to make a tractor? They're easy to make. Assembly lines on tractors, very effective. And they like to have the laboring man standing and saying the farmer's raking us off, taking trips in the winter, piling it up, and they'd like to have us at one another's throat. My impression is that we have more in common than we have in division, and that in that fact we can work together toward developing a national food policy in the Farmers Union. The Farmers Union has the opportunity to say that we will be among that small group that's willing to be a national conscience. Are we only going to be concerned about agricultural economics? We haven't in the past. We've been concerned about what is good and right and just, internationally and nationally. We have the opportunity to become the national conscience out of rural America, the rural prophets. And there are those who would tear the tongue from the prophet. There are those that would reduce us, farmer and laborer, to a group of men in the room with the hammers all bleeding. There are those who would see us as the clown who cried in the alley and the poet who died in the gutter. There are those who would divide us. And the Alliance for Food is an effort to say, come, let us reason together. Let us get our venom on the table. Let us realize that we are being manipulated. Let us realize that we can insist, if we are together, that they make it good again. It is my contention that we can deny the children of the world guns, but we cannot deny them food. Join me in solving this problem. Thank you very much.